Hello and welcome to the fourth in our series of CPH Lab Fireside Chats. Today I have with me Danielle Turkov from Think Film. She's an impact producer. And along with us in the room, we have all of our CPH Lab participants who are all currently preparing works that are going to premiere at CPH Docs in April, together under the banner Protopia. So while everyone's been in their lockdowns and we've all been imagining what kind of a world we want to emerge into, our lab participants have been preparing works that speak into that. And so, of course, the idea of Protopia is that a utopia is sort of distant and unachievable, but a protopia is something that you can take small steps to actually achieve. So all of these projects, in a sense, sort of want to change the world. And so then impact becomes quite important, but it's not often that we think about impact producing when it comes to immersive projects. But Danielle is someone who's actually started to do this. So I wanted to bring her along to tell us about impact producing and actually what it is and how she got into it and how it can be applied to immersive work. Now, Danielle started out as a human rights advocate. And so she started her career in Brussels, which is where she currently lives, close to the European Parliament. And her journey has sort of taken her from the European Parliament to the Palais in Cannes, where she's sort of currently working as well, which is a really, really super interesting journey. So I'd like her to tell us a bit about that, but starting off by telling us how you got into this in the first place and what your job was like in Brussels and what you did as a human rights advocate. Danielle.
Thanks, Mark. First of all, it's just really great to be here today and to learn about all the different things that you're involved with and see how immersive and impact can kind of marry itself into the production. So it's really great to be here and share vision. So thanks, Mark. Yeah, I come from an unconventional background in the sense that it's not really expected that I would end up in the film industry and probably even less working on crossover VR and AR content. But actually, my background is I grew up on a council estate. Mainly, I traveled the world with my parents because my dad was just a kind of a country hopper who liked to see the world and get to know people in their real environments. And we were kind of dragged along that journey. And I say dragged because we didn't have a choice, but it made me who I am right now. And living in those environments, when you're living in kind of real grassroots communities, what you see is that politics and empathy and identity are real kind of almost dirty words. You are part of that community wherever you live. You're not really differentiating yourself in any way, and you're not being unique. And I feel like that was something that was very personal to me. I have two very different parents. I have a Russian Jewish father and Irish Catholic mother. And for me, identity, culture, and human rights and politics actually were crucial. And I wanted to find a way of kind of mainstreaming those things into communities so that they really felt they would be able to get engaged with those concepts. And, in that sense, for me, human rights was that way, speaking a language whereby essentially people can have a reason to be involved in what their future looks like and getting involved with human rights, even though it seems like if you're living in the Western world that's something that doesn't involve you directly. It really does. Human rights sits at the essence of everything we do. And for me, then I just kind of conjured up this idea that I wanted to be on that stage. I wanted to make a difference and get into politics. And so I decided that journey of loving the arts and loving the stage and loving politics would come together, and I would find my way somehow into the European Parliament stage. And that stage was really through an internship. I started 8 years ago within the European Parliament, working for the president, then was Martin Schulz. And, started to work on specific commemoration campaigns and human rights campaigns and looking at really tough legislation like the Lisbon Treaty and how that worked for us as citizens and how did that translate to people on the ground, really. And yeah, so for me, that's where my journey started. It's all about taking my roots, taking my identity and culture, and then going through university, deciding to study politics, deciding to be that person that would merge my kind of world with that world and find a way in. And I did, and I came across incredible people along that journey. I started working as a consultant on lots of different human rights issues, including the right to believe or not to believe, and and identity politics. And I was the one to bring Nadia Murad, who's now a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and they made a documentary film about her story, to the European Parliament, and really take that discussion around IS and the Yazidis to the level of a legislation, of a bill that was passed at the UN, at the committee, and realize that that's where my passions were lying. So yeah, they're the roots, in a sense, of why I decided to kind of touch into human rights, and where my political experience comes in, studying politics and languages and travel.
So I forgot to say to our lab participants that this talk sort of falls quite easily into about 3 different chapters. So if you'd like to ask questions, please post them, and then say in 5 minutes or so, we'll ask the first questions, and 10 minutes we'll ask some more questions, and then we'll include questions from people on Facebook right at the end as well. But I've got a question for you right now, Danielle. And so what were the tools of the trade right then? So you talked about wanting to achieve empathy. And so how did you do that, for instance, with the case of the Yazidis?
Yeah, I mean, for me, in that story, it was about bringing kind of short clips and videos that had appeared in news content into the policy realm, and by bringing their stories directly as the people that experience those situations to the policymakers. So instead of just running events with experts and academics and the people that draft legislation and having roundtables, we wanted to bring the people who are really at the essence of those policies, and get them to come in and showcase exactly what the policies were about, and what they were fighting for, and really get them to connect directly with those stories. And yes, it wasn't filmmakers at that time; it was really the individuals, and I suppose the faces and the names behind statistics and facts. A policy arena seems such a static place, and it can be a place where it can be very divisive between cultures, identities, class. And by bringing some of these incredible heroes, and I call them heroes, they themselves wouldn't call themselves heroes, but champions of really determined individuals who fight every day for truth and justice and freedom, it really is what represents true democracy. It's the idea of the plethora of identities and a mixture, and this kind of melting pot, and bringing that nuance into a European Union, which can often be also about a unified identity, which is super crucial. But it's also about how do you have a unified identity whilst maintaining that individuality, and I think that's also very true of the arts and storytelling and filmmaking, and in immersion as well.
So then when it came to films, how did you come to realize the power of films in order to help you with this advocacy work? So what was the trigger? And then what made you think that there was more to be done in that field?
Yeah, I guess it goes a little bit back to, why my past, and why or how I ended up going from kind of my studies and my life experience into studying, like I said, studying politics. But also as a young person, I was super involved in stage theatre. I loved getting up and performing and kind of immersing myself into somebody else's personality, and feeling like I was embodying their vision, their ideas, and kind of transmitting that to an audience. And then the return that you would get, the kind of direct positive or negative feedback from an audience, you can feel that energy. And I remember having a burning desire to get on stage and do that for a living. And my mum would say to me, and she's from Liverpool, she'd go, "You're all right there, doll." She goes, "Doll, it's 2 things. It's the same stage. Politics is the same stage. It's just a different audience. And you can be more powerful and make a difference if you're considering to be behind the camera, not in front of it." And I think she kind of knew me and said, "Well, this is your personality. I don't know how well you would do being the person that has to be directed. You should direct. You should be in charge. You should direct your vision and implement that." And so that's where the roots came in. And I carried on my work at the within the EU, within the campaigns. I brought artists and creatives into all sorts of different campaigns, including a massive stage theatre production around Holocaust commemoration for the president of the European Parliament. And I also did a massive campaign for refugee and minority rights around with musicians. And I got myself really into the field. So I started going to Lesbos and working on refugee camps, and I started working with creatives in that context and training, and just getting to grips with the real kind of activism element and the art itself. And once getting into the kind of European Parliament and feeling like the structures of policy itself, even if I could bring those elements into that arena, the machine was so slow. I couldn't make those changes. I couldn't really support the benefactors and make that change. And it was just so frustrating that I decided, right, I've now got to jump myself into this NGO environment. So I get into the NGO world, I become more of this activist. And then I see that there's also limitations there, that NGOs are often divided in their causes and they're not all working together on the same issue. And that can cause a lot of stalling and a lot of time that you want to gather momentum. And then, what happened was, incredibly, is I had a lot of friends in the film industry, and one of them, Melanie Hawken, a producer in Australia, working with Anne Shin from Fathom Film at the time, they had produced a short film called My Enemy, My Brother. And, she said to me, Danny, it's an NYT op doc, like, we need to get this shortlisted for the Oscars as a short category. And I just said, and why the hell are you talking to me? Like, what do you think I can do? And she said, but you're walking in the halls of power, Danny. You can get some of the biggest influencers in the world to watch our short form content and see how it would influence policy, and then that would resonate in the press, and we might get shortlisted. The Academy might see it and go, well, this is a film that's really like making paces, changing the way people see and view an issue. So I was just fascinated that they felt that was something I could deliver. And so I said, okay, well, let's do it, let's go on. I said, what's the return? And she said, look, if you get us shortlisted for the Oscars, we're already nominated at the Emmys. I'll just bring you, I'll get you a ticket and you can come along. And in those days, when you don't know the industry in any way, that seemed like some kind of, I don't know, some massive fictional adventure to New York to attend the Emmys. And I thought, great, let's do this. And we got a campaign rolling. We got NGOs involved. We had a specific ask around the rights of repatriation of refugees with their families. So when I say repatriation, connecting different, often refugees are placed in different countries and they were not repatriated to their families. And the story of my enemy, my brother, of two enemies from Iran and Iraq who then became brothers as refugees in a post-traumatic stress meeting in Canada, was a really strong basis for that kind of reunion. And they were not family per se, but it was very symbolic. So we did that. Obama watched the film at the White House. We did a massive high-level event at the UN in New York with Canada. And, as we expected, a few months down the line, we'd been shortlisted and nominated. And it was just an incredible journey. And that's the one where I just kind of went, why have I not put this into a business model? How can I make this something that I do every day? I come from the political side. I have that knowledge, that expertise, the access, the understanding of how to strategically put messages within the contexts of the art without affecting the art and driving it towards the right audience. So yeah, that's really how the kind of two worlds met. And it was just such a powerful moment, really.
At that stage, did you realize that there was such a thing as an impact producer? Had you ever come across anybody who did that? Or was there a template that you could follow when it came to sort of then structuring this into a business?
Yeah, funnily enough, it did exist, but I didn't know about it at the time. I knew that, I understood consulting, I understood networks, and I understood the power of bringing people together, and how if you knew the right people and you had the right story or the right idea or the right project or even the right business at the time, you could really elevate an item into an action very quickly. But yeah, when I kind of had this revelation, I really didn't know about impact production at all. And of course, then I started embedding myself in that world, and I looked into the Doc Society Field Guide, and I saw lots of different kind of, I would say, more marketing or PR campaigns around impact, and just kind of learning what the world was doing. And of course, soon became very apparent to me that, you know, the US had been doing a lot in terms of impact campaigns and awareness, whereas Europe had not, and Europe in the bigger sense of the word. So UK and documentary had, but UK and film and UK and Europe and crossover hadn't. So, you know, it was just something that I was exploring at that time, but I saw there were tools, but not necessarily real political actions, real political deliverables, if that makes sense.
So what other films have you become involved in? And when you're looking to become involved in a film, what qualities in that film are the things that jump out at you, or you think, yes, well, that's really something that I can do with? And then how do you end up structuring a campaign? And how closely do you involve the creative team in that?
Yeah, it's an interesting series of questions, really. I mean, what do we look for in a film? I think in a film or an experience, really, I think it's always about the ability of the storyteller to really hone in their message in a kind of, I would say, seamless way. That means that, you know, you're not saying this is a disability film, or this is a film about democracy, or this is a film about Black Lives Matter, or this is a film about human rights. Or, you know, I feel like those narratives are so overdone that when you find something so powerful in its subtlety is what we look for at Think Film, because you give people the space to ask questions, and the space to ask questions is what drives you to action. As an individual, I think over the years with, you know, things like oppression and colonialization and, you know, lots of these kind of movements that oppress people into action, I think it's the idea with what film and crossover can do for us is that we're looking for the types of content that will leave you that freedom to feel like you've asked yourself questions you've never asked before, and you want to act upon that. And it's the action that we're looking for. So when we watch a film or a crossover piece, and we're looking to kind of assess what value it will bring to us and how we can best transmit that to other audiences, whether it be the political sphere, the NGO sphere, it could also be venture investment, impact investment, it could be civil society, grassroots. It all depends, but for us, it's about leaving those people space to ask questions. So when we're looking at that content, and we do have an impact assessment criteria, which looks at things like what are the current most powerful hot topics when it comes to society, community, and politics. So the kind of socio-political narratives. And it doesn't mean that a content per se has to be around a specific issue. We can often pull out narratives from content that not even a director or producer have considered, because it is in that subtlety that you give people freedom to kind of use your content the way it can drive the change. And the reason we like that is because we're not asking the socio-political narratives to drive what you develop. We just want it to inform you about the kind of environment, communities, and outreach that can be done. So by keeping that in mind, you also know exactly what the possible action could be. And we look to present that to the projects we work with. And we also look to train other producers to think about those components when they're developing their content. But the most important thing is like anything, is to have a very good story told incredibly well, often nuanced, so not just told in the classic ways. But the biggest thing for us is leaving that kind of freedom to decide what it means to you personally as a viewer.
I think one of those hot topics is artificial intelligence, isn't it? And actually one of the projects sort of touches on that as well, called Mimic, that's being developed in a lab. And you worked on iHuman, didn't you? So can you tell us, how did you become involved in that? And then what kind of a campaign were you able to create around that film?
Yeah, I think iHuman is a very special project and campaign, because we actually came into it at a time where policy was not even on the table. There were no national AI legislations that had been confirmed. People had started discussing what it meant, how AI was going to transform every level of our lives, from work to the way we use our phones, to advertising, to the use to education. to all sorts of arenas, really, including press and the way we receive content. And then the other sides of it, obviously, the deep fakes, the factual truth around content, because obviously AI has an incredible ability to also kind of create content by itself as well. So the way it's revolutionizing our own industry. But the opportunity there was really to change the discussion from kind of ethics and self-regulation in the world of, in the big tech world, to human rights and rule of law. And I think I can quote somebody who came in as a stakeholder. So Think Film brought this person in as a kind of ambassador, and he's now one of the biggest tech influencers in policy in Europe, Paul Nemitz. And he says, what is illegal for humans should not be legal for machines. And I think that is the biggest thing that we kind of picked up for the campaign, was how do we transform this discussion into a discussion that is based on citizens being put first at the center of AI, so a human-centered AI approach. And I can tell you that we achieved that very well. We had huge events at the OECD, a big security organization in Paris, the United Nations. We did a G7 side event with the British government. We had several events at the EU, at the European Union and Council of Europe. And now in a few weeks, they're going to release the first draft of the AI regulation. So in the space of, I would say, 2 years with iHuman, coming in just before post-production, we were able to really drive and change the narrative and get a regulation launched to discuss a law that puts humans first in this AI revolution. And for us, that's exactly what we're looking for at Think Film. But at the same time, what we're looking for is to kind of find alternative audiences. And that was the most that's the most powerful thing an impact producer can do, is with the right strategy and approach. What you can really do is you can take the content even before it's finished, and you can drive audiences to consider using it in their workshops for training, whether that be policymakers or different corporations. We had NGOs host screenings that also contributed finances to their activities. We did a theatrical release to drive sales, which supported the sales agent with their sales outreach. An impact producer is not just someone that sits there and drafts campaigns and does social media. They're really a strategist that wants to kind of, essentially in my eyes anyway, they're a strategist that should distribute and work alongside the producer and director to get their vision as widespread as possible. And with iHuman, we were quite successful in that sense. We were able to take it away from what most people describe as a dystopian narrative, and really even have engagement with Microsoft, big tech companies that you may think would never have engaged with that kind of content, but they have, and they continue to do that. In fact, Tonya is going to be having a fireside chat herself with Eric Horvitz, one of the big academic experts that it works closely on all AI developments for Microsoft. So it's really quite incredible what you can achieve when you kind of really sit together as a team. And the final point I'd say is we even brought some content to iHuman before its final post-production stage. That means we brought some of the highest level political influencers. So the woman that was working who's now the vice president of the European Commission, but was commissioner for justice, dealing with the hate speech legislation with all the big tech companies, she featured in the film. And that was through us really understanding how they can be engaged in film content. It can be very difficult to get access to that kind of influencer. And then we also managed to get the partnership on AI, who Tonya had worked on for a while to get, but sometimes through the impact narrative, you can actually achieve a bit furthering your access, because it's just a different approach, if that makes, I think that's
interesting. How did you then become aware of immersive work, and why did you think that there was a role for an impact producer to play in the immersive field?
I think my first kind of taste of immersive was really in that first production with My Enemy, My Brother, the short content, because with that whole journey that we took, NYT then found a way of getting it financed into a full feature. And then we also got funds from the Canada Media Fund to create a kind of VR experience. And that was really how it all started for me, because it was about understanding that you could actually end up being so close to the person that you consider to be your enemy. And I was just thinking how fascinating it would be from a policymaker's perspective to use, VR experiences specifically at that point to really better understand their opposition and to find better compromises, to put people first when they're looking at the way they treat each other as opponents in policy. And that's what really kind of triggered it for me, because I thought, well, when you're looking at when you're watching films, you kind of have this, you're engaging with it and you're observing it from the outside, and you're already feeling quite compelled, or you're thinking about the characters and the personalities, if not in feature but in documentary, the same way you're kind of relating to the person you are spending an hour and a half with sometimes observing. But what I felt that VR and XR did, and that's just by going, when I was attending the festivals, taking the time to also go to those exhibits and really get involved and understand a bit more about what is really possible in VR and XR. And I just felt like, if you're already feeling slightly compelled when observing, well, how would you feel if you're just totally immersed in that experience? And I guess you could say that the more interactive it became, the more compelling it was, the more I felt that people wanted to know more, dig deeper in the experience itself, but also as a consequence of that experience. And yeah, for me, I think what's incredible as well, as one of the first experiences that really got me thinking, wow, this is really something, and this I hope will make you laugh, is it was actually a VR short presented by at Cannes 3 years ago, and it was a frog, two frogs mating, and you felt like the frog was sat on top of you. And I know it sounds bizarre, but it was so utterly intense that I was like, how could anybody not feel what I'm feeling right now in this experience? And I was just thinking, how can impact come into that to really prove that immersing yourself into these different formats will actually drive users, improve the way people act upon their experiences in terms of the policy making arena, but also in terms of audiences more generally. How can they become involved in other people's stories a lot more? And yeah, that's what inspired me to get involved. And I really feel like, you can kind of step into the realm of empathy a lot more than you can when you're just observing.
So can you tell us a bit about some of the immersive projects that you've been working with, and tell us what it's like in the working alongside the creators of those projects? When do you become involved, and what kind of conversations do you have, and does that have any impact even on the creation of that particular work, or do you sort of just come on much more to design the outreach?
Yeah, I'll start with the formatting before I go into our new projects. I think one other comment I'd add on to the point before is that what I also find with crossover, VR, AR, and XR, is that really what you're also doing is you're able to add a kind of component of measurements and metrics to your impact, which are not so easily done when you're building a whole campaign with a kind of 2D feature. You're building off the content and assets of a film, but within an AR experience, for example, you could embed a survey, or you could embed kind of data collection on emotional experiences through different parts of that journey. And you're able to decide how best that narrative evolves based on collecting that data, and also taking it one step further from an impact perspective, is really, going to the policymakers and saying, well, X amount of people said that, within this experience, they would want this outcome. And that data can really drive the way the influencers in the world kind of put forward their legislation. And that was obviously personal to me in terms of the impact. And that's why I felt that crossover had much more potential in terms of diversifying user engagement, but also being able to collect data effectively to prove your points about which change that you wanted to make. And I think to talk a little bit about projects, Well, obviously, you know, at the start of Think Film's journey, it's mainly been features and documentaries, but most recently, we have in the last year taken on some VR, crossover and AR projects, and I'd love to go into a little bit more about Monkey Nation, and to do that, to share that first, I'd love you to kind of feel slightly immersed into the Monkey Nation world. So I'll cue the music and the visuals for Monkey Nation.
Fresh ham, fresh ham, fresh ham, fresh ham, fresh ham, fresh ham.
Say hello.
So I hope you've got yourself into the Monkey Nation vibe there, and it's really exciting to share a little bit about that journey. So we actually met Monkey Nation last year through CPH Labs, which was fantastic, and they were already in partnership with the Royal Opera House on the kind of soundtrack that you're hearing there, this kind of trap rap opera. And what really got me with Monkey Nation was its potential in crossover, that in more than one format. I could visualize it in so many ways, and I could put it into a comic strip, an animation. I could think about gamifying the experience, but most importantly is I really thought we could connect Ham's vision with environmental action and outcomes, and get a community of people activated in caring about the planet that may otherwise not be engaged. And so he kind of started his journey, and we followed it for a while, and then recently we have partnered up because we're going to take it from its first level. So they did some kind of tarot cards, they got shortlisted and involved with South by Southwest, and then now what we're doing is really taking the AR experience and its kind of alpha beta kind of stage into a stage where it can be really used as a teaser into something much bigger, to kind of get people in on a campaign, and the campaign being, which kind of environmental personality are you? So playing on the ideas of BuzzFeed questions, and kind of using AR to kind of Harry Potter assign your Monkey Nation character and personality, so that in that pseudo personality you can really drive the action that suits your kind of personality within that issue. So rather than making people feel like they should just support taking plastic out of the ocean, or being a vegan, or whatever it is that might push you in certain campaigns, the idea within this experience with our involvement is to find a way to identify what kind of eco warrior you are, and to support you with all sorts of kind of additional materials and organizations that suit that journey that you've taken within the Monkey Nation world. And then at a second level, just bring you into so if you're a pathfinder, if you're going to find the ways to solve the problems, then we'll connect you with a world of pathfinders so that you can discuss ways that you could support each other. And again, the powerful thing about that is that we're distributing it so far and wide, different communities, different countries. It could be chat rooms, it could be different portals devised by different XR content developers. And then, there are just so many other formats that it could take, including theme tunes and tracks, and artists creating viral songs that you could share your Monkey Nation personality with. So the reason we're in is because for Ham, this isn't a commercial endeavor. It's a beautiful concept that he's worked on for so many years. But his vision is to really activate a portion of society that is not currently engaged with this issue. And if that isn't the success metrics, then he doesn't care where it goes. That is his primary objective. And so, yeah, that's That's Monkey Nation. We're also working on Stay Alive, My Son, which is a VR experience looking into the power and threats of memory as an issue. Like if we cannot remember previous historic events, the storyline around that, and you may have already heard about it, is around the Cambodian genocide. And it's also around just missing people. You know, when people get lost and they're never found, what does it mean to kind of create that synergy? And that's what we're working on right now, just kind of really finalizing an impact concept for that will drive broader audiences who may not necessarily directly connect with the issue in Cambodia. But whilst also staying true to that, you know, working with people on the ground to keep a Cambodian impact focus, but also have a broader focus as well to kind of diversify the audience of the experience. And we're also very honored to be working with Kareem Ben Khalifa, who I know was a former Fireside Chat participant, and we're working on his AR experience. And I'm going to share right now a little poster with you. Here we go. So you can see 7 grams. We've worked on this issue for a long time. It's the extraction of minerals, conflict minerals, and the way it affects the community on the ground. This story specifically relates to the kind of minerals that are used in our smartphones. And essentially what Kareem is doing is getting this whole AR experience translated into multiple languages through partnerships with press organizations. And what we're doing at Think Film is we played a huge role in convening a roundtable with people on the ground in the Congo and really getting Kareem to understand their fight when it comes to the actionable. And they wanted to include a kind of an actionable ask within the AR experience. And we're now working together to define how to embed that within the AR experience and to be able to take that data supported by a think tank to submit that evidence to change the legislation to make sure young people are no longer at threat in the mines whilst working on the smartphones that we use every day. So that's 7 grams. I can see those are the 3 kind of most recent projects we're working on. The others I can't share yet because we haven't finalized where we're at. And I see I've got a question here, Mark. Should I?
That's right. Well, first of all, today we were talking with the lab participants and saying, who do you want to meet when you get to CPH Docs? And so it was really good to see that you were talking about Monkey Nation. That was a lab project from last year, and you met them through CPH Docs, and now you're working with them. And it really looks like you're getting in kind of early, because obviously they were at kind of prototype stage then. And the conversations that you've been having with them subsequently are sort of helping to actually shape the project. And this is really the question I think that Reed has got for you. Reed is working on Mimic, that project that I mentioned before, which is also in the field of AI. Reed, do you want to come forward and ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Danielle. Thank you so much for this really inspiring talk so far. I guess you were talking earlier about iHuman's impact on human rights public policy and how it was unfolding while the project was still in post-production. And I guess I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about how this might have impacted the work itself as it evolved, and if you found that the living conversation had like a circular impact on the project itself.
I think it's a great question. I think it really depends on where you're at in the production cycle of your film or of your project. You know, Tonya was really at the final stage of post-production, and I would say she's kind of a stronger activist than me. She had impact, I think, you know, at the forefront of her brain, even in the development of this project. She worked on drone prior to this, and that's when she found out how AI technologies were being deployed in a military context, but then, you know, basically being commercialized into the mainstream market without most citizens having a clue about the way that's being done or the ethics behind that. And I think that was what drove her to make this whole film. So I don't really feel like I couldn't sit here very honestly and tell you I awakened her into an impact vision. She had impact at the center of her thinking in the production, but she definitely didn't know how she could bring iHuman into the framework of making that change. And the truth is that it's kind of both. When you talk about is it circular, it really is. So before iHuman was kind of had a sales agent, it was just in its final stages and not even presented at a festival yet. We did a sneak peek at Cannes Next, which is about the future of film and society, and AI was a big topic there. And we brought the head of the UN on robotics and the vice president of Microsoft and the #1 tech influencer. And we just packed the room up in Cannes, which I don't think they'd ever see. It was like, I think there were only 100 seats, and at least there were people all over the floor in the hallway. And I think it was fascinating because from Microsoft's perspective, who were already looking at how they could look at privacy in the EU and be the champions of that in terms of tech companies on legislation, I think it really affirmed to them that the film industry plays a huge role in that narrative. And so, yes, I do think it's circular. I think we did bring her content, but we in no way did we shape her vision and desire for the outcome. The outcome for her was to make sure that AI was going to be a discussion that didn't just appear once in a blue moon in the press. And I think in 2 years, now we see at least 5 or 6 articles a day globally on AI. So I hope that answers your question. Let me know if there's something you need me to clarify.
Oh, thank you so much. That's really helpful.
So Danielle, I wanted to ask you about the E word, empathy, because you raised it very, very early on, sort of saying that was one of the reasons why you got into your advocacy work. Empathy is a really interesting subject for lots and lots of reasons. One of those reasons is when Chris Milk was talking he did a TED talk about immersive work, and he called VR the empathy machine. And then ever since that, people just rabbited that constantly afterwards, as though there was this assumption that immersive equals empathy. And so I obviously wondered if that's true. And because so many people were repeating it, of course, then it started to become a dirty word, and then people were saying, well, it's rubbish, But then that got repeated to the extent where I thought, well, it can't be, it can't be, right? And so then I started studying it a bit more deeply as well. One of the things that we're facing, I think, as a community of documentary filmmakers, is that empathy has been reduced. Now, this is a measurable thing. There's been studies in America that have been taking place since the 1970s, where they've been studying the student population every single year from the 70s till the present day, and giving them the exact same test. And what they discovered through that is that those students today have 40% less empathy than they did in the 1970s, and that the most sharp decline in that empathy was over the past 10 years. And I think that some of the causes of this are because people are reading less fiction. Apparently, also studies have shown that the more fiction you read, the more empathetic you become. It's also because more and more people are living alone. It's more likely that if someone rings your doorbell, it's an Amazon delivery man or it's Deliveroo rather than your neighbor. So you have these kind of transactional interactions with people. And then it's also the anonymity of online social platforms, where it's very easy to demonize people. So we're looking at a very pressing problem that we as a community of creators, I think, really need to be addressing. So it'd be very useful for us to have any insights on the relative empathetic potential of different platforms. And you've been through this journey where you worked with certain tools in your advocacy work, and then you saw the power of film, and now you've seen the power of immersive. And I just wondered if you, from your perspective, can have any comment on the relative sort of empathetic potential of those different platforms.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's not the first time, Mark, that I hear that, oh gosh, don't mention the E word in VR, like that's not, or XR, that's not what we're about any longer. And I'm just a bit like, well, what's the point then, and I say this not because I think that it should only be about empathy, because empathy has in itself, it's a word where you kind of, it's a positive word, isn't it? It's kind of like you empathize with something good. But, you know, the reality is that empathy has two outcomes. You can empathize also with your deepest, darkest thoughts and live in someone else's shoes that might, you know, I remember I played the game, you know, the Iranian Revolution game by Story Inc. That was one of my first kind of gaming storytelling immersive experiences, and I was in the room and I was blindfolded, you know, and they were like, sorry, I played that, I wasn't that role. I was playing the interrogator, and my friend was the person blindfolded. And it's like, you have two options. Do you know, do I shoot, or do I, you know, is she worthy of the information she's given me, or is it a pile of shit, basically? And you know, I remember thinking, I have to decide whether to shoot her or not, you know, and there is this element of, you know, I can personally tell you that I would never dream of thinking about something like that in my day to day, but that this experience forced me to. And there are all sorts of elements worth questioning around empathy. But I do think what would be fascinating is if a group of scientists really did come together, a coalition really, to look at and monitor, you know, how long does it really take? How long do you have to kind of live inside an immersive experience to really feel that you are considering the other? I mean, there was a marvelous test done on recent, like a kind of PR campaign, where they forced different people from all different backgrounds just to look into each other's eyes. And, you know, the idea was that they brought people together who physically hated each other. They purposefully designed that. So they asked people, who are your enemies and things like that. And, you know, they just faced people into a room, closed the door, and made them look at each other. And of course, the output is incredible, because when faced eye to eye with no tools other than that person in front of you and nothing else, there were relationships building, friendships, dates, you know, the kind of outcome was impressive. And I think, you know, immersive does have that power. And I think it's time that, you know, some of the scientists and experts come together to evaluate and look into that concept. And with any great thing, there are also its risks, just like AI. So I don't think just because there is a risk, look at its potential and understand it. And, you know, I know with Stay Alive, my son, Victoria has been very active at the MIT lab, looking into this idea of how many minutes it takes to really have some kind of othering effect in your mind, understanding other perspectives, other people's visions, other people's lives and worlds. But of course, there's also the other extreme, which is empathy must be something when you know that big companies like Google set up their own labs. You know, they have labs dedicated to investigating empathy in tech. So we have to be realistic and know empathy shouldn't be denied, because if we deny it, there's certainly plenty of other people looking into it. So we should be part of the conversation, I think. But it's an exciting thing. What is sad is to think that if empathy is on the decline, we could also be part of that solution. We could bring people closer together with these tools. And it's often how you decide to use something, not what it actually does.
Exactly. Just going back to your role as an impact producer, I think we can understand how you're able to help producers use these tools to kind of expand audience, but can you also have any kind of an impact on actual distribution and funding as well?
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of our life cycle, my answer would have been quite straightforward, and I'd have said no, because it was such a disruption to thinking amongst productions, film funds, distributors, that I found myself struggling to convince really that there was this value. But over the last few years, with some kind of brave productions willing to take on some challenges with some of the thinking that we had put forward, we really have proven that that's the case. You know, we recently worked on a big feature production where our campaign and impact contributed 35% of ticket sales at the box office of that experience. We're also looking at getting a new kind of docufiction series that we're working on, being supported by a live kind of AI event, which will be supported and financed by different corporations that will then kind of drive funds into the series itself. and the data itself will be useful for the script development. So that's how early now we can come in and provide value. We can bring in development funds based on impact. We can bring intellectual property assets from experts who can drive potential narratives for scripts. Distributors have come to work with us to look at PR marketing. We did that with National Geographic and The Cave. We actually came up with all the social media assets for the whole campaign, the Oscar campaign for the documentary. Impact isn't always what you just see at face value. And I think we have the ability, when you're not right inside, when you're not the creator, you do kind of step out. Weirdly, it's the inversion of immersion, because as creators, you're so immersed. But as impact producers, and in my opinion, if you're a good impact producer, what you're doing is taking that lens. You're standing around going, what is the ultimate potential? How far can we go? What audiences haven't you tapped into? What other elements can we produce alongside what you have that could be supported by another entity that would be useful for them, and driving forward even other spin-offs around the experience? So really diversifying it and making sure that the distribution is not just, your standalone, let's get a distributor. And I'm sure, as all of you know, with VR, XR, and AR, that's not the way you go anyway, because classic distribution doesn't work in these cases. But what's also interesting is when we're talking to people like POV and broadcasters, and even Arte recently, we are challenging the way they use content. And often the conversations around XR, VR, and AR are now, how can we create pieces that accompany the kind of classic feature and doco content that will drive audiences to that content in different ways, so as tools to bring audiences. And I think we just have to ride this roller coaster of people not understanding the value, the creative value in a standalone piece, and see how we can bring other elements of distribution into that conversation to drive more interest into immersive. I think that's just how I see it at the moment.
So when I look at your career at Brussels, at the European Parliament, and you're bringing creative work into that environment and able to create real world change as a result of that, and you get Obama to look at films, etc., which is amazing. And then, because you're working more and more with the creative community, you yourself are spending more and more time at different types of film festivals. So CPH Docs, Cannes, for instance. So to what degree are you now bringing that world from politics into these worlds of festivals? Does that happen at all?
It really does. At Berlinale, Cannes, and in other contexts, what we have done is bring these influencers in to see the creatives in their best environment, to understand what is driving their development and content, because it's about inspiring policymakers to really live and breathe the work that they're involved in. And by making them privy, in a sense, to our world in the creative sense, you're driving them to kind of immerse themselves into something they don't understand. And it's exciting for them. Let's face it, it's a world that they don't really access, don't understand, are not on, and they shouldn't be driving that in any way, because the power of the art is really that it's independent. So for me, I think what's amazing about being a convener in that sense, as you say, Mark, bringing these people into that arena, is it's one step closer of getting them to feel like the people they represent. And that might be a very socialist concept on my side, but I feel like, how can you represent policies if you do not know why you're drafting those policies? And I feel like creatives very uniquely represent the broader audience of the story they're telling. So instead of, I'm not saying instead, but maybe at times where it's difficult for them to step into a country or a community, art can really bring them into that world in a safe space where they're not being judged or watched or pointed at, which I'm not saying there isn't space for that sometimes, because there is. These people are people of influence, whether it's politicians, corporations, or people who have a lot of influence generally in society. You need to also give them a place where they can ask questions, question their own actions, and take those decisions in their own safe space. And I think that's the value of bringing some of these influencers into that arena. recently, again, with the feature production just before COVID, we brought 700 policymakers into a unique premiere screening of the film. And we also brought, even though the film had a context in the States, we brought factory workers from a company in the Netherlands who had also been victims of the same chemical poisoning. And, you know, I can tell you that in 6 months, we got the chemical removed and the policy launched by the EU saying that no more to this chemical. We had 39 multinationals also remove it from their supply chains. If you know how to, and of course, you know, we worked on the policy as much as we worked with the corporations to convince them to take them out. The point is to merge those two worlds in a way that will make them feel like they're free to choose what the action is. But so far, what we've seen at Think Film is the action is always more beneficial to humans and society than if we hadn't done it.
Well, thanks a million, Danielle, for sharing your insights, and thanks to the lab teams. This is actually going to be the last of these fireside chats, but the whole of this lab process is going to culminate at CPH Docs in an expanded conversation, which will take the form of a symposium, which I hope that you'll come to, Danielle, where you will actually meet all of the lab participants who will be presenting their work there ahead of them premiering at the festival. So I hope you'll join us there, as well as everybody who's tuning in as well, and see you then on the 23rd of April.
Thank you so much.
Now.